Hey everyone, ready to dive into the heart of photography. Today we're tackling a big one, and that's aperture. We're going deep, folks, sifting through articles, experiments, the works, to really understand how this little ring on your lens can make or break a shot.
It's more than just a setting, it's like the artist's control over light. Master aperture, and you're on your way from taking snapshots to, well, really crafting photographs.
I like the sound of that. Now, our sources describe aperture as this adjustable window inside the lens. Blades, circles, it sounds a bit like a sci-fi gadget to me.
It's really not that complicated. Imagine it like this. Blades inside your lens form a circle, almost like, the iris in your eye. And this opening, that's your aperture. It's the gatekeeper deciding how much light hits the sensor.
Okay, bigger the opening, more light gets in, makes sense. But then they threw these F numbers at us, and suddenly I'm back in high school math class. Not my favorite.
Ugh, the F number, the photographer's secret code. And like any good code, it takes a bit to crack. Smaller the F number, like F2, that actually means a wider aperture, so more light floods in. Think of F for fraction. Smaller the fraction, the bigger the opening.
So F2 is like throwing open the curtains, while F16 is more like peeking through a crack.
You got it. And just like you wouldn't have your windows wide open on a sunny day, you use a smaller aperture, a larger F number, in bright light. Prevents those blown out highlights, overexposing the image.
Makes me think of how our pupils work, In the dark, they get bigger, wider aperture to let more light in.
Exactly. Same principle at play. Wider for low light, narrower for when it's bright. But here's where aperture gets really cool. It's not just about how much light, it's also the key to depth of field.
Depth of field, right? Rings a bell. That's all about what's in focus.
In a nutshell, it's that zone of sharpness in front of A and D, behind your subject. Those portraits where the person's crystal clear, but the background's all dreamy and blurred? That's shallow depth of field, my friend, and aperture plays a huge role in creating that.
Okay. So wider aperture equals that blurry background look.
You're getting it. Wider aperture sends that background out of focus, making your subject really pop. It's like magic, especially for portraits. Gives them that almost 3D feel.
Gotcha, portraits, that makes sense. But what about landscapes? You usually want everything sharp, from the trees in front to the mountains way back there, right?
And that's when a narrow aperture really shines. Smaller opening, larger F number, boom, you get more in focus, both near and far. Perfect for those sweeping landscapes.
So wide aperture for that soft, blurry background magic. Narrow aperture to get everything crisp. It's like this whole other layer of control over your photos. But earlier you mentioned there's even more to it. It's not just aperture.
You're sharp. It's a team effort, really. 3 key players in this depth of field game. Aperture, we've covered that, but the plot thickens when we bring in distance to the subject and focal length.
So aperture is like the starting point for depth of field, but it's not the whole story, huh?
Nope, there's more to it than just that dial. Imagine you're out on safari, right? Camera's locked and loaded, wide aperture. You're ready to get that lion with the super blurred background, all National Geographic style.
Sounds epic.
But here's the thing. How far you are from that lion, that matters too. Distance to your subject, that plays a big role.
So even if I've got my aperture wide open for that blurry background, being too far from the lion could throw things off.
You know it. Closer you are to what you're shooting, the shallower your depth of field's going to be, even at like a narrower aperture. So to get that line really popping off the background, gotta get up close and personal. Too far away, that background's gonna start creeping back into focus, spoiling the effect.
So it's all relative then. Things closer together in the frame, that's what really makes that blurry background pop.
Now you're thinking like a photographer. It's not just about one setting, it's this whole dance between the elements. And it gets even wilder when we add in our third musketeer of depth of field
focal length, right? That's our zoom lens, yeah.
Bingo! Zoom, or focal length, it's got this fascinating relationship with depth of field. Think of it like you're using a telephoto lens zoomed way in on something far away, like peering through a telescope, right? You're squashing the distance, bringing that far-off subject closer. But, and here's the kicker, you're also making that depth of field shallower, even when you're at those narrower apertures.
So more zoom, shallower depth of field. That makes sense. It's like those wildlife photos where the animal's like crazy sharp, but the background's just this wash of color.
Exactly. Those photographers, they've mastered this triangle. Aperture, distance, focal length. They know how to juggle them to get the exact look they're after. And the cool part is you can experiment with this too. Remember that hand experiment we talked about?
Oh yeah, that was the one where you don't need any fancy equipment, right? Always up for a good hands-on demo.
For sure. It's such a cool way to see depth of field in action, like right in front of you. Go ahead, hold your hand up, palm towards you, comfy distance, so you can still see it clearly.
Okay, got it. Hands in focus and the background.
Wow.
Whoa. Eye ass blurry. Never noticed that before.
See? Depth of field live. Now slowly move your hand away towards the wall or whatever's behind it. Keep an eye on what happens as it gets closer to the background.
Hold on. The stuff behind my hand, it's getting clearer. Whoa, that's wild. It's like my hand's controlling the blurriness. Closer to me, super blurry. Further away, it sharpens up.
What you're witnessing, my friend, is the interplay of distance and depth of field. And get this, you've basically recreated, what, a 50mm lens at f2.4 Cs? That's like basically the
No
human
way.
eye.
So I'm walking around with a camera lens built in. That's amazing.
Kinda. Our brains do a lot of the work when it comes to seeing depth and all that, but yeah, the principles are crazy similar. By moving your hand, you changed both how far it was from you and its relationship to the background. That little experiment just proved how both those things affect depth of field.
Mind officially blown. This is awesome. So we've covered a ton here. Aperture, f-stops, depth of field. I feel like I'm starting to speak a whole new language.
And just like learning any new language, the fun really begins when you start putting it all into practice. Not just knowing the rules, but bending them, seeing what happens.
Our sources talked about this cool exercise, taking an object, putting it a few feet from a wall, then just messing around with the aperture while you take pictures. Sounds like a fun way to practice.
Absolutely. It's one thing to hear about it, but when you actually see those f-stop numbers turning into like actual changes in your photos, that's when it clicks. Start with your lens's lowest f number, maybe it's f3.5 or f5.6, whatever yours goes down to, and notice how blurry the background is. That, my friend, is shallow depth of field in action.
Okay, so f3.5, blurry background, got it. What then? Just start going up the f-stop scale.
Exactly. As you stop down the aperture, increasing to f8, f11, all the way up, you'll see more and more of that background coming into focus. You're literally expanding that zone of sharpness, the depth of field, just by turning that ring on your lens.
Man, it really hits home that all this like technical stuff, it's not just numbers and dials, it's about having actual creative control over your photos. That's awesome.
That's what sets apart a snapshot from a photograph, you know? Do you want your subject to have that soft, blurry background really drawing the viewer's eye? Aperture can do that. Or maybe you need every single detail, front to back, super sharp and clear. Aperture's got you covered there, too.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening, honestly. To think Aperture was just another setting on my camera, but it's more like, I don't know, a paintbrush for light. It's how you set the mood, tell the story of the picture.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And the best part is, knowing this stuff, it gives you power. It lets you go beyond just documenting what you see and move into like actual artistic expression. You're not taking a picture anymore, you're crafting an image.
So to sum it all up for everyone listening, next time you're looking through that viewfinder, remember, it's not just about what you see, it's about how you choose to see it. Aperture gives you that power, that control over your vision.
And that control, that's where the real magic happens. So get out there, experiment, play around with those aperture settings, and see what you can create.
You heard it here first. Time to ditch the auto mode. Unlock your camera's full potential. Until next time, everyone, happy shooting.